February 25th work session of the Ann Arbor City Council related to the fiscal year 2021 budget with respect in particularity to public services. Mr. Crawford, take it away.
Good evening, Council. Tonight is another in a series of meetings you have on the budget, and we'll be talking about public services, a lot of our infrastructure and our utilities. Just to remind you the process, on March 11th, we will have a work session on the water rates. And then on the middle of April, the city administrator will present his recommended budget. Will be followed up by the third week in April with the Housing Commission and the DDA having a presentation to you. And then on May 6th, we'll have a public hearing on the budget and the fee increases that would be included in the recommended budget, followed by your budget adoption consideration on May 20th. So for tonight, like I said, we'll get into the public services. The presentation is organized by fund, which is where our restrictions are. And so staff will be presenting from that perspective. Each of those funds, they've got some highlights and some updates about the business they are going to provide, and as well as talk about budget impacts. Just as we've talked about in prior years, if you have questions that we don't get to address tonight, we're happy to take those in writing. If you could send those to myself, Karen Lancaster, and Sarah Higgins, we'll be happy to follow up with you in writing each week. So next up on the agenda is the Public Services Administrator, Craig Hupy.
Thank you. I'm Craig Hupy. I'm the Public Services Area Administrator. With me tonight, I have a number of my staff, which I'd like to introduce, starting with Marty Prashant, our Chief of Staff. Boy, talk about being tongue-tied. Lynn, who is our Budget Supervisor. Nick Hutchinson, City Engineer. Earl Kenzie, who is Wastewater Manager. Crescent Slotin. Brian Steglitz, who is our Water Treatment Manager. Molly Maciejewski, who is Public Works Manager. Robert Keller, who is a Communications Specialist. And Mr. Hess, who is a Transportation Manager. Raymond. This evening's presentation will be an overview of the public services budget. It will be a financial summary of each fund, and we'll cover the highlights of the funds. And there's already one slide ahead of me in the presentation. Public services total budget is, in round numbers, $138 million. Of that, the three largest slices of the pie is sewer, water, and capital projects. That is approximately slightly more than half of that $138 million. The public services manages the major and local street funds. I guess I am controlling it now. The other direction. The major and local street funds is approximately $15 million. Over half of that goes into the right-of-way maintenance, which is the winter maintenance, snow plowing, pothole patching, signs and signals. The piece about this fund this year, there is additional Act 51 money that is starting to flow into this fund. A number of months or years plus ago, the state made a change in how they were funding roads and the share going to local governments, and that is now starting to flow into this fund. And it will continue to flow as long as the state comes through on their commitment for that funding. The major and local street impacts, Public Act 618 is an additional funding that's coming to us this budget year. It's approximately $600,000. It is a one-time funding, so it doesn't continue on into future years. One of the items we will be purchasing this coming budget year is a piece of equipment for bike lane snow plowing. As we go forward with protected bike lanes, we have to have a piece of equipment that can get into those bike lanes and perform winter maintenance on them. The reoccurring impacts, as I said earlier, the increasing Act 51 revenue. We are looking at undertaking spray patching of potholes, and we will be contracting for that. That is supposedly a more lasting method of patching potholes. We're increasing our capital maintenance, which is our Cape Seals, slurry seals that we have started rolling out this past year. Pedestrian safety enhancements, and we are asking for a senior transportation engineer out of this budget.
Mr. Hoopie, do you know roughly how much the bike lane snow removal equipment might cost?
I don't know, but you've asked a question, and I'm sure somebody,
$100,000.
about 100,000 is the answer.
Sorry to ask
Yeah.
another follow-up, but since we're on the topic, is there just going to be one piece of equipment or many? I don't want to get bogged down in this, but
We're starting off with one because we won't have that many miles of protected bike lanes to start with. This is to fit in so that they can plow the narrow bike lanes that are physically buffered from the roadway where a regular plow can't get in to plow.
okay, so it's not the other streets, let's say 7th or,
It could be used on those, but it's not necessary. We can plow 7th with a regular plow.
okay, I'll let you.
Next is our, what we call the resurfacing millage, but is really street, bridges, and sidewalk millage. It is about 13 million. And the projects planned for FY20 is, again, the annual resurfacing that we do. The road capital maintenance, the slurry seal, Cape Seal comes out of this funding. Sidewalk and ramp repair and replacement, and crosswalks and alternative transportation and safe routes is also part of this funding.
Mr. Hoopie, is that the same safe routes as the Safe Routes to School grant program?
I'm going to look at Nick. Safe Routes is in there,
That
but
particular project is funded.
from there, but there are more safety grants, et cetera, that would be matched with this fund. General Fund Active Transportation, we have a one-time funding for this area, and we are planning to use the approximate $1.5 million for identified crosswalk upgrades, open street events, transportation outreach campaign, and the Washington Street Bicycle Boulevard. Next is the county health millage, pedestrian safety. The impacts that are ongoing are lighting the major street uncontrolled crosswalks. Approximately, as of January 31st, there were 199 locations identified on that list that needs upgrading. So far, we have completed 10 locations that the city undertook, 4 that DTE undertook, 5 that were part of other projects. We are planning to do 41 more upgrades in the next 12 months. We are planning 3 to 4 years to complete the current list that was established in January. However, I want to remind you folks that we're getting requests all the time that get added on to the list. So it doesn't mean in 3 to 4 years we'll be done, because there'll be other locations identified. And some of the 199 may get bumped down by higher priority locations that are identified. So that is an ongoing process.
How many new ones come in? Could you tell us? 10?
I
100?
can't tell you offhand.
We started with like 165, so
Yeah.
like in the last year, we added 30.
So we've had 30, almost 35 in the past year added, and I would expect that rate to be about the same for the near future. The electronic speed sign that we use in school zones will also be funded out of this fund. The water supply fund, the bulk of it is water treatment and water treatment plant, the water distribution system. When you look at that, the administration slice of that pie looks large, but the way we are set up, all our customer service and all our, my salary, Marty's salary, Lynn's folks are all loaded into the water supply fund, and then there are transfers into that fund from the sewer fund and the stormwater fund, et cetera. So on the expenditure side, it looks lopsided. The other point on this slide is you can see on the bar chart, we are ramping up our debt, and that is for the Plant 1 replacement upcoming. And so we start taking on debt in '21 for that project, with construction occurring about FY23, starting in FY23. The water supply impacts, one-time expenditures is the service line inventory. We're mandated to do that in calendar year 2019. It is being done to better understand where we may have galvanized services left in the system. Primarily, they will be on the customer side. The issues of how we replace those galvanized services on the customer side is still up in the air. It would require us to do work on private property. A number of communities are challenging it in court, saying the MDEQ regulations are causing us to perform something that we are constitutionally prohibited from doing. That doesn't stop us from doing the inventory and better understanding the magnitude of the situation.
Excuse me,
Sure.
I just have a quick question. So we're just looking for places where there's galvanized pipe, where there was previously also a lead gooseneck, right?
Correct. The assumption is our lead gooseneck records, while we have, I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere in the 2,000 to 4,000 range identified. There is probably an assumption if they had a galvanized service on the customer side, it is likely had been a lead gooseneck on our side. As part of that inventory, we will work at that knot and try to puzzle out whether that is a correct assumption or not. Part of it's going to be based upon the year of construction of the home.
And so if there's galvanized pipe, but there was never a lead gooseneck, there would be no responsibility to remove that?
I'm not going to answer that
Okay,
because
I accept that.
it is a question that is yet to be resolved. And why we have a good understanding where we had lead goosenecks, an example was we were doing design work on a street project this year with a water main replacement, and lo and behold, we found a lead gooseneck that our records didn't show. So why we think we have them all out of the system, I'm not going to say we have absolutely everyone out. We have all of them that we know about out. The impacts also is going to be a reservation for planned capital investment. Plant 2 repairs, we are looking at replacing Plant 1, but we need to do some rehabilitation on Plant 2 so that as we take Plant 1 out, Plant 2 is in good working order to carry us through those so-called lean times as we have reduced capacity to treat water. Reoccurring impacts is a planned rate increase of 6%. On another sheet, you're going to see we carry that through plant construction. We also are going to have a reoccurring or ongoing expense to change out our carbon as we deal with PFAS. We know we are going to be having to accelerate our carbon change out. Addition of 1 staff at the water treatment plant as we deal with the PFAS, 1,4-dioxane, and other water quality issues. We are finding that we need to add 1 staff member to have the depth and breadth to handle the issues as they come forward in the public. The customer portal annual license, on a previous presentation, folks had asked for us to have the ability to have automatic leak detection or high usage reports go out to customers. This is what this will allow, that if you have an abnormally high usage showing up, that it can identify it and trigger out a notification. And increased line stops. As our system gets older and we're doing valve replacements and servicing buildings, et cetera, we have a need to isolate parts of the system, and our older valves do not necessarily hold well. Using a line stop as a temporary stop that we can put in functions as a valve as we can put in a new valve or replace an old valve, so we can restore the functionality to the system. Ongoing priorities for the water system, as I talked about earlier, 1,4-dioxane, PFAS, lead, and continuing to plan an upgrade to reinvest in the infrastructure. On the sewage disposal fund, I would like to highlight in the pie chart the 2 blue pieces of the pie, the increased depreciation and the debt service. That's because we have put approximately $200 million of investment into that plant. That investment now starts showing up as depreciation on the books, so we have to fund that. And we also have some associated debt service with that funding. Sewage disposal fund impacts, one-time impacts. It says holding tank maintenance. Really, that is the retention building maintenance. It's a large building that holds about 70 million gallons of sewage if necessary. It was constructed, lead paint was used in the construction. So we are mitigating, removing the lead paint and having to repaint the inside, recoat the insides of that building. Switchgear maintenance, high voltage switchgear needs to be in the very simple terms, cleaned and dusted, but it's high voltage switchgear, so it takes a specialized contractor to do that work. And you're smiling when I say dusting. It is literally vacuuming and dusting it. Dust can be a very explosive in a high voltage environment. We are doing an odor study. As the plant is completed, we have had a history of some odor complaints in the area of the plant. The plant is completed. We are now going back and looking at the plant and seeing where we are having odor occurrences and what is the source or likely source of those odor occurrences and what would be the mitigation or remediation issues that could be taken. The plant has to have an asset management plan developed. It's a new plant, and we need to develop the maintenance plan for that plant. Reoccurring impacts, planned increase of 7% on the rate. Solids removal contract, that is our land application. During the summer months, our biosolids are applied to agricultural fields as a beneficial reuse. Our contract will be coming up in the next 12 months. We see other contracts in the area in this land application are going up, likely doubling, so we have to be prepared for that. Increased principal payments, obviously with all our investment, we have to pay down our debt. And contract engineering support for the collection system as we work at maintaining the pipes under the streets. We are looking at contracting some of that engineering work to help us work through which pipes need to be replaced and what methodology do we use to replace them. On the sewer side, we generally do not dig up a pipe to rehabilitate it. We typically would line it or do a pipe bursting or some other process that would minimize the damage to the streets. The highlights, some of these I've already hit, is the increased depreciation due to the approximately $2 million we've invested in the plant. Increased maintenance need due to the aging collection system and the increased plant preventive maintenance. Understanding why we have put $200 million into the plant, not every piece of the old plant was replaced, so there are still, like the tertiary filter building, which is a 1970-ish, 1980-ish investment that we need to be putting maintenance money into. The stormwater fund is just under $10 million expenditures. The bulk of that is going into the conveyance system in the urban forest. The other piece, the asset management and partnerships in the blue, I want to point that out in that we have a very close relationship with the Water Resources Commissioner. We do a lot of projects jointly or through the Water Resources Commissioner. That is an advantage to us. They have a very good track record of securing funding, state and federal funding, and generally, but not always, when we fund through that type of program, we have a forgiveness of part of the loan. Recently, you were presented with a tree replacement contract through the Water Resources. We petitioned them to do our tree replacement. As part of that, we expect to have a $60,000 forgiveness of the principal as we go through that process. Stormwater fund impacts. It's time to do our tree inventory update. Although we are maintaining our trees, the trees are growing. And why we think we have captured every tree we've cut down and every tree we've replaced. It's time to go through and do a system-wide update of the inventory. Reoccurring impacts is a planned rate increase of 13% this coming year. While that is a high percentage, it is a smaller bill. And as you look forward, we are tapering those rate increases off. You'll see it in a later slide that I think it goes down to approximately 4% in outer years. We are doing tree pruning. We do 10% of our street trees every year, so we're on a 10-year cycle for street tree pruning. Detention pond inspections. That's to allow us to assess the condition of the detention ponds that feed into our system, and if they're not functioning correctly, they will have an impact on our system, so it allows us to identify those that need maintenance and direct the people that maintain those ponds to do the needed maintenance. Stormwater best practices. I'm going to skip over this because it's on the next slide in more detail. Green infrastructure maintenance. In your picture, you see a rain garden. While they're nice looking, they do require quite a bit of maintenance. When we started off on rain garden maintenance, we were planning to use volunteers to do much of that maintenance. We still do use volunteers to do that maintenance, but we are finding items like silt that gets into those rain gardens, the grit and sand, that's not easily removed by the volunteers, and we have to contract to get that material out. So as we go forward, our green infrastructure maintenance is a mix of volunteers and contracted services. And again, increased investment in the collection system. The slide, the item I skipped over was the level of service, O&M phase-in. This slide shows you, as we go along, what services or what activities we are undertaking. You can see we started off with public engagement, and I can't see on yours whether tree pruning falls up there, shows up there, but we're adding services on each year as we go forward to better maintain and take care of our systems.
Mr. Ruby, I have
Yes.
a question about public engagement. Is that a placeholder, or do you do public engagement?
We do public engagement. It's public engagement / public education. We're required by our stormwater permit to undertake very specific activities, and we do those. Much of that we do through contract to the Huron River Watershed Council. Some of it we do directly ourselves, so it's a mix.
Thanks.
As I had said, we would have the rate slide up. You can see the various rates I had pointed out on stormwater, why we are looking at 13% in FY20. We are tapering that down to a projected 4% in '23. Water, we had no increase in '19, and that's requiring us to stay at 6% for the near future. Solid waste fund, it's about $17.75 million. What I want to point out is the light blue in the upper left. The other part of that cost is we are the proud owners of a closed landfill, and we have ongoing expenses to maintain that landfill. So that's a gift that will keep giving to us for years and years and years. This fund covers our waste collection, our residential and commercial recycling, the transfer station. two transfer stations, actually, our waste transfer station and our recycling transfer station are covered out of this fund. And the customer service for all of our waste, solid waste activity. Sure.
That box on the side, is that descriptive of the whole pie, or is it just the other section? Because the last several pies we've looked at, I've been curious about what constitutes other.
Well,
like
other, in this case, is our,
Is
a
the
bulk of it is our landfill closure.
Oh, okay.
But it would also be any of administration costs, any debt service would come out of that. Customer service comes out of that. That's our other.
Okay, okay.
The one-time impacts going on in the solid waste fund is we have 3 smaller, older buildings out up in the landfill area. We are planning to take those down, demolish them, remove them. They're more of a liability than they are of any asset. We have to deal with our recycled truck collection as we look at a extension of the contract with Recycle Ann Arbor. We provide those trucks to Recycle Ann Arbor, and we expected to end the service last year, and we're still going on, so we have to make some investment in the trucks. We don't want to make long-term investments right now in those trucks, so we are looking at what lease options we can come up with to provide collection vehicles for recycling. We are planning to extend the compost season 1 additional week at the end of the season from previous years. We are asking to add 1 enforcement officer. Right now, our solid waste enforcement is done through community standards, but it is not a dedicated person, so we have difficulty when we're in the downtown situations getting a response and a follow-up on issues, or even issues in the residential area. So we are asking for a dedicated enforcement officer for that activity. Also, we are planning to add a solid waste manager that will be a net zero because we will be losing a position of the solid waste program manager, so we'll be swapping those out, so it will be a net zero, but it will be a change in what we deliver and how we deliver it. We will be increasing the solid waste education, and we'll be deploying different trash cans in the downtown.
You talking about the compacting?
Yep.
Compactor trash cans?
Yep.
And those are for like shared use in the alleys, that kind of thing?
These are the street cans.
Oh.
These will be your little street corner cans.
Oh, like they have out at WCC when you go in there, they have you put it in there and you can hear it crushing it down?
Yep. And what it will do is reduce our labor costs to service them as frequently. And they're smart cans. They can report out, and I'll look at Molly to know how often they report out.
As often as we'd like, every day.
They will let us know their status, whether they're close to getting full and whether we need to get out there and service them.
So smart cans, so that's just for the downtown area, not like our parks or anything?
Parks already has 2, 5, 4? 4. And they're working well for them, so we are planning to put them into the downtown.
Will I have you for a second? What is what's this, what kind of solid waste enforcement is necessary? Is that like when we get complaints from residents about the alleys, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not only alleys, but we'll also get it in the student sections after sporting events. couple times, maybe 7, 8 times a year.
So it's like a response to a see-click fix or a phone call, that type of thing?
Yep.
Okay.
Updates on solid waste. We'll be coming to you to extend the contract for commercial waste through June, the end of June 2020, along with the curbside recycling contracts and the interim MRF operating transfer contract. That will allow those contracts to all expire at once after the solid waste resource management plan is completed, which will be done in July of this year, 19, but then will give us 6 months, or longer than 6 months, like 10 months, to react to the plan and make recommendations going forward. That plan will look at changes to programs and services, methods of service delivery, funding methodologies, and implementation strategies as we go forward.
Are we compelled when we set fees for things like solid waste to do a cost of service study like we did for water?
Right now, our solid waste fee is a tax. It's not a fee.
It's from the solid waste millage?
Yes.
So a downtown restaurant pays according to their millage rate of
They
that
pay
property?
on the millage, and they also pay a fee based upon the service rendered.
So many tips per week, that kind of thing?
Yep, and when we look at our city-delivered services, we do look at the cost of that service actually, and as the fees and schedules are presented to you, you're going to see tip fees go up or down based upon our past year's cost. And if it's a contracted service, it's based upon the contracted price.
Are we at questions now?
Yes.
Excellent. I got Councilmember Nelson. I've got a couple of my own. Spray pothole fixing.
Yes.
Go on.
I will turn to somebody who knows more about it than I do.
I saw a couple of
Molly,
queries as to what that means.
Molly Machoweski of Public
Machoweski.
Works will talk
Spray
about it.
potholes.
Right, so we demoed a piece of equipment, I think, Councilmember Lum, you were aware of it, up on, is it Glenblock? Yeah, last summer. So they come through with a machine, and it is literally like it sounds. They spray the material in, and it's much longer lasting than someone coming out with a shovel and putting in the cold patch in. So, yeah, it's to deal with bigger defects than just your typical pothole because it lasts longer. So it's really good for kind of more middle of the street cracks and things like that, longer like vertical veins. So,
Excellent. Thank you. I've got two more. On the solid waste manager gain versus the solid waste program manager loss, what is the, help us understand what's going on and why it's going on.
It puts in a higher level manager for the fund, and it's being done to provide firmer direction to the program.
Thank you. And then I've got essentially a confirmation with respect to the county millage usage. So I gather that in this cycle, there'll be 41 approximate lighting upgrades resulting from the millage?
Crosswalk upgrades, yes. And the 41, I'm glad you say more or less because
Sure.
as we design each one, they're not the same, so they have different requirements. There is a range of costs for doing one, and depends whether we're doing it or DTE's doing it.
But that's the order of magnitude generally.
Yes.
And then finally, there was indicated from the millage that there would be a set of electric speed signs that we would deploy in school zones.
Yes.
What sort of coverage in school zones can we expect?
And I will turn
Are we
to...
going to be done
to-
with school zones and
I will
electronic
turn-
signs after this, or?
I will turn to the city engineer who can talk to
All
what's
right.
being covered.
Mr. Hess?
Well, actually, Raymond Hess, the transportation manager, will.
Excellent.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, can you repeat the question?
Of course. One of the ads from the county millage rebate was identified as electronic speed signs deployed in school zones. 1, 5, 10, all?
So typically what we focus on are school zones along the major arterials. As I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of our elementary schools and middle schools are kind of recessed into the neighborhoods on local streets, but a lot of our high schools are on some of the major streets. And so we want to kind of draw attention to those school zone areas, especially since the speed zones tend to be a little bit higher than the 25 mile per hour of the local streets. One of the reasons why typically we don't sign school zones in the neighborhoods is because the school zone speed of 25 miles per hour, which as I understand it is mandated by the state, is the same as the posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour in the neighborhood. So in effect, the school zone, even when the school zone is in place, the school speed is the same. Whereas when you look at, next to a high school, you may have a posted speed limit of 30, 35 miles per hour that then drops to 25 miles per hour during, morning bell and afternoon bell. So the focus really is on any school that's located along an arterial or a higher classification road where there is a speed differential.
And can we expect them all to be covered this year, all to be covered in 2 years?
I want to say we are... I don't know the answer to that. I can get back to you on it.
Thank you.
We are working towards making sure that all of them, I just don't know if we'll finish them this year or not, or if it's the following year.
Understood. Thank you. Councilmember Nelson and Bannister.
I had a question back on slides 7 and 8. I'm curious where any efforts to fill sidewalk gaps might fit in. And I also was curious if in the pies, I'm curious where that expense might fit, or if there is a map or a chart somewhere of like sidewalk gaps that you plan to fill in the next year or so.
Understanding filling sidewalk gaps is generally a first-time sidewalk, and that is borne through special assessment, so they don't primarily reside in any one location. As a capital, we do expend capital as we do new sidewalk gaps. The most recent project that has been in front of council, it is a combination of special assessment, grant, and then we use, I believe, Act 51, we use millage for the match. We use street millage for some of the matches, and general fund.
Well, yeah, I understand. Since we've just voted on it, I understand how Safe Routes to School is and the grants related to that are directing us to specific sidewalk gap projects. I'm thinking of sidewalk gaps that are probably not around schools. I'm curious.
Well, an example recently we did was Stone School, where we put sidewalk in along that. We used the federal urban aid money to help write down the sidewalk with that. It's not always Safe Routes to School that we use for grant money to write them down. When we put sidewalks in along Miller, that was also federal and state aid money used to write those down. Then we special assessed, and then some of the funding comes from the millage funds.
Okay, well, so then I guess my question, I'm trying to understand, do you have specific projects in the pipeline now? Like, is there I know that I saw on the lineup
I'm going to
plan.
turn to the city engineer who can speak more specifically to which projects we have upcoming that might have sidewalk gap filling. Generally, we don't select a project just to fill sidewalks. What will generally happen is we'll do a water main replacement where we are causing the street to have to be resurfaced or rebuilt, and we will then fill the adjacent sidewalk gaps as part of that, or it will be a street project that is coming along that requires the street to be rebuilt, and then we'll fill the gaps along that. Generally, we don't target gaps unless we have a request for that.
Oh, okay.
Not to contradict Craig, but but over the past few years, we actually have been targeting specific sidewalk gap projects, and that's using our a portion of our federal aid, our Surface Transportation Program funds, and the purpose of that, as Craig indicated, is to be able to leverage those federal funds to reduce the assessment costs to the property owners. It's a similar type thing as you've heard about with the STEAM Safe Route to School project that we're using grant money to, to offset the assessment costs to the residents. So we have several projects coming up in the next couple of years to fill sidewalk gaps. I'm going to try to name some of them off the top of my head, but I'm probably not going to give you a complete list. And some of them are standalone projects. Some of them happen with other road projects, as Craig said. I know this year coming up, we've got a project for filling some sidewalk gaps on Boulevards. We've got I think in the following year, we have some sidewalk gaps along Fuller Court and Washtenaw, between Huron Parkway and Pittsfield in that area. We have some on Jackson way out at the west side of town by Wagner. And I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of.
None of those are in Ward 4. Okay, so I'll cut to the chase. I was curious about Stimson. So several residents have asked me about when are we going to get a sidewalk on Stimson. So I was curious if there's a map somewhere.
That one's on, so that one's on our radar. It hasn't. We haven't figured out how to quite get to that one yet. It's high on the radar, so we're trying to figure out a way that we can get that executed. There is what we did a few years ago was we actually did a prioritization of all the sidewalk gaps in the city using primarily our GIS resources to do that, and with a variety of factors that went into scoring those. So we do have it's in map format, and we can get that out to all of council. Map format is probably the best way to display it because it's hard to describe them in a tabular method. So, but we do we rated them kind of in several tiers of categories, and we're trying to aim at the top priorities first.
So some of it is targeting federal funds that we can utilize, and some of it is taking advantage of projects that are in the vicinity that you're going to be already ripping things up anyway.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bannister.
I just wanted to follow up on slides 7 and 10 also, and I just wanted to remind people that with regards to Elizabeth's question about sidewalk gaps, as part of the North Side STEAM Safe Routes to School project, I did ask Mr. Lazarus to help me bring to you all a proposal that sidewalk gaps be paid for out of this millage. And he responded that we'll need to get some sort of agreement from council in order to go ahead with that research, because it would require a lot of staff time. And so I just wanted to plant that seed with you all to, if your residents are looking for, if they're logging on See-Click-Fix or on the Ann Arbor Police Department's traffic enforcement, that they need, for safety purposes, some sidewalk gaps covered, then that's why it would be relevant if we paid this out of special assessments. Or if we waived the special assessments and paid for it out of this budget. So that's something to think about. And Mr. Hoopy, how much of a radical change to the budget would that require?
Radical.
I'm not going to try to answer that standing here right now, but it would be a shift in funding priorities.
No more street repairs, that's for sure.
Okay, just planting that seed. And the one other question I had was on slide 10, just to follow up on Mayor Taylor's discussion about that. I just wanted to highlight for my colleagues that the pedestrian safety portion is like $440,000 a year. So over the 3 to 4 years of all these great projects on slide 10, you know, that's $1 million or slightly more. And I think these projects compare very favorably to the one little 1,600 block of Traver, plus a little bit on Brookside, that we're spending similar amount of money for just that little north side steam safe routes to school. So that I just wanted to highlight for you all. What I'm seeing is here we are getting so much more. And that was my main point, and I didn't know if Mr. Hoopy had a comment, if I'm reading that correctly, that the safe routes to school is way more expensive than all of these other great safety measures we can get.
Yeah, most of these safety measures are lighting upgrades, so they're relatively inexpensive to undertake.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Hoopy, and to all your staff for all the work in preparing presentations and the backup documents, the 2-pagers, the budget impact sheets. It's great info and greatly appreciated, so thank you. I have a lot of questions, so I'll just be sending several of them in, but I'll just touch on a few of them. Street repair funding, so a few questions related to street repair. Last year, the proposed budget didn't reflect all the available funds in the major and local street funds and council passed a fiscal year 19 budget amendment to allocate an additional $4 million or so on street capital maintenance, resurfacing, and repair. And in looking at the 2-pager for major and local street fund, it appears we're in the same situation for fiscal year 20, an excess balance of about $4 million over the required reserve balance, which is equal to a year's worth of revenue. So am I reading that correctly?
Back to the first part of your question, we are still spending down the extra money that was given to us last year.
$4 million?
Yeah, it was understanding that was passed in, became available to us in July. So
It was passed when we approved the budget in May.
Yeah, May, but we can start expending it in July.
Right, because the budget.
And so we can't spend it all in the 6 months between July and December. It takes a couple cycles of the construction season to spend it all down.
Right.
And part of, I'm going to look at Marty, the $4 million excess in fund balance is that the artifact of the budget year ending in the middle of the year before construction is done. So our low point in fund balance is actually in November, December at the end of construction season, but the budget year ends in the end of June where construction is still ramping up and occurring. So we'll always have a look of having excess in it in July at the end of the budget year.
Right, but I'm looking at, since the fiscal year is July 1 to June 30, I'm looking at, the projections and the year-end balances, and if I'm reading correctly, what you proposed in the materials tonight, we're saying again, the 2-pagers and the budget impact sheets, that the plan at this point is to not spend the $4 million that we could be spending on fixing the roads. If that is in fact the plan.
That is the plan.
Okay, I'm going to be proposing a similar budget amendment as I did last year, so just a heads up on that. So you're confirming that, okay? And then also on the 2-pager, you've listed the challenge we've talked about previously of inadequate contractor capacity and availability that's preventing us from actually spending the money that we have. Have we been working on ways to meet the challenge, like expanding our geographic base, or, having multi-year commitments?
One of the items, you hit on one of the items that we have looked at is longer-term contracts to lock up contractors providing us services going forward. I'm going to look at Nick about bidding to a larger area.
Yeah, that's, the way we do our procurement process, those contracts are put out through the BidNet system, and that is statewide, and in many cases even goes out to other states as well, in Northern Ohio, Indiana, et cetera. We'll oftentimes look at things that are happening in Michigan. So it's getting out to people already. Oftentimes, those contractors that are further away can't really supply competitive pricing, though. So it's a tough issue to try to solve. It would be great if there were more contractors that did that kind of work out in the market, that were nearby, that could provide us with competitive pricing. But the multi-year contract is something that we have been doing more and more recently, which certainly helps.
Okay, doing more of that. That's great. Thanks, Nick. And then one thing that you mentioned, maintaining full staffing levels, you list that as a challenge. I'm wondering if the vacancies are due to, I don't know, retirements or folks leaving for other opportunities, and what we're doing to meet that
In what
particular
fund?
challenge.
What
You
fund?
mentioned maintaining full staffing levels as a challenge.
For what fund?
It's for
Oh, and signals? It's been various retirements, and as the economy is better, those technical jobs are better paid outside of the city. When times are tough, the contractors aren't employing anybody, and all of a sudden we look like a good place to work, so it's cyclic.
Okay. Pedestrian safety, thank you. I'm a bit confused as to how much will be in the budget for pedestrian safety and what the actions will be. You have a couple of large chunks are clearly identified. You have 1.8 million in the street millage fund for crosswalk improvements and safe routes. 1.5 of the general fund for, quote, active transportation. But what's not clear is what other funding will be, and I know there's some questions about this, and particularly about the county millage proceeds. That's mentioned on the use of that on your slide 10, but the amount's not shown. And I don't know if there will be any pedestrian safety improvements funded out of the major and local street funds, the alternative transportation fund, or any other funds. So either, if you could please provide some clarity tonight, or, and/or, please, ask if you could follow up with a schedule.
No, I think we'd follow it up with
or spreadsheet
a summary of it.
that lists all of the pedestrian safety-related improvements planned for fiscal year '20, their costs, and their funding sources.
We can
If you could do that, thanks. One last question on solid waste, if I may. So you mentioned the resource management plan won't be completed until July. Obviously, once it's completed, there's going to be lots of discussion, and so the budget, I'm assuming, is essentially status quo?
Correct.
Okay.
Status quo with the cost adjustments that we are anticipating with contract extensions.
Okay, so extensions of what we're doing now, then? Okay.
Correct.
I mean, I personally have no problem with that, given that we're revisiting virtually all the operations and deciding what it'll take to get it right. So, so thank you for confirming that approach to the budget is right. And then just as a follow-up, if you can, one thing that remained a question, though, is on the FTE changes listed on slide 22, if that will be consistent with what is ultimately decided. Sort of an unknown at this point, I imagine, but.
I can speak a little bit about it. Even if we change the service delivery methods, there will be a need for that customer service enforcement position to deal with poor behaviors by our customers, so that we see that position going forward. And the solid waste manager, we see that going forward, whether it's directing our own staff or other staff or a combination of both, there's going to be a need for that.
Okay, thank you very much again, and for the information. I'll just say on the sidewalk millage, I know the sidewalk millage is a repair millage. It's not a capital millage for building sidewalks, where that's done with, special assessments and various grants, and to offset the costs of the assessment. So it sounds like if we're talking about a millage for covering the capital costs, it would be an entirely new millage. I'm just saying, because it's again, the sidewalk millage is a repair millage.
Got Councilmember Griswold, Rumlawi, Hayner, and Grand. Councilmember Griswold.
I want to comment that I think that the electronic speed zone signs at Huron are working very well. On Glen Street, we replaced a storm sewer grate, I believe, last year, and one of the problems is that the street is so narrow that the traffic actually drives over the curb extension, and there's a huge pothole there now right on the extension. So I'm just asking if you could give Glenn extra attention, given that we are driving on the edge of the road there. Is there money in the budget for a sidewalk on Narrow Gauge Park? That's probably about 150 feet.
I'm going to tell you, no, not specifically in the budget. That is a question that has been referred to legal, whether we're obligated to put it in, and that is not a public street. That is a private street.
I realize that. When Narrow Gauge was acquired with Greenbelt funding, the city went out and destroyed a mediocre sidewalk all along the other street, not Green.
Narrow Gauge?
Probably Narrow Gauge, and replaced that.
I'm going to look at Nick, but I think there's sidewalk on one side of Narrow Gauge.
Right. It's missing on Green. That's correct, one side.
Yeah, it's green where the sidewalk is not there. And there's sidewalk, I believe, on the west side of Green and not the east.
Oh, okay. I can follow up later.
Yeah.
The neighbors just believed that there was a commitment made.
And if it was made through whoever purchased the land. It was not made through the street funds.
Oh, okay. The Greenbelt funding then. Oh, okay. And I have been looking at pedestrian crashes for the last 10 years on Michigan Traffic Crash Facts, and I realize that nationally pedestrian crashes are up. Our crashes are up about 20% from 2008 to 2018, and it concerns me because we do have a major initiative to improve pedestrian safety, and other communities that have had aggressive initiatives, such as New York City and Grand Rapids, have seen a decline. And so I want to make sure we're spending our money wisely, and one example would be positive contrast lighting at our sidewalk, or at our crosswalks.
And that is the intent of the item that we listed, the 199 crossings.
Oh, okay, great. And just another comment. Are we replacing any of the streetlights on Huron? Because they have been out for many months, and we've actually had a pedestrian crash after dark at Huron and Division.
If the lights are out and they're reported to us, we have been pursuing them with DTE. Those are DTE lights. And to the best of our ability, we lean on DTE fairly hard for those replacements.
Okay. We better jump on them because they've been out for months.
We meet with them weekly.
Okay.
Councilmember Romlawi.
Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate staff's time and efforts in compiling tonight's presentation. I have a bunch of questions, some that I probably will have to mail in. But a couple ones broadly. Our Forestry Department, where is that? I mean, I think before I joined council, we entered a framework of sorts, 10 years annual cycle of tree trimming, pruning, and I just want to know where the state of our Forestry Department. I heard the person has left. Are we hiring someone new?
And I'm not going to try to use the previous full title, because I will not get it right, but the person unto which our forestry program falls under, we are searching for a replacement. We have a contract in place for services in the interim. We are implementing our 10-year pruning cycle. You saw in the budget, we are doing an update to our urban tree inventory. So we are aggressively managing our urban trees.
And we're using private contractors to do this work right now?
We use a mix, staff and contractors.
Okay. Off to the trash situation in downtown, whether it's enforcement and, or smart trash cans, which I'm glad to see finally make their debut here. Will they include recycling? Will there be a recycling component to that trash can, or is it just garbage?
I believe not. At this point, we are just implementing them on the trash side.
And what is the Downtown Development Authority's contribution to these new improvements and perhaps helping funding enforcement for the alleyways?
At this point, it is coming out of the solid waste fund. There is no DDA contribution to solid waste.
And not even for the infrastructure? The trash cans being infrastructure?
They have in the past. They have provided us
We're in conversation with the DDA about that.
for the new trash cans. In the past, they have provided some funding for the trash cans.
Okay.
I can't say they're going to going forward. As Molly said, there's a discussion on
I
that.
hope they will, and I'll do what I can for that. The crosswalks, and big problem is illumination. And are we employing any new technologies that don't require the type of infrastructure that older technologies used, LEDs, solar installations that are a bit more mobile, less impactful, and you can install them relatively easier and cheaper?
All our lights, I will say virtually all our lights are LED when we put them in now. We don't put conventional lighting in. We have experimented with solar lights at some locations. There are issues with that. They are, I don't want to say they're higher maintenance, but there are issues with the solar lights.
Yeah,
So I don't know what other technologies you are looking for that would be, you said mobile. I don't think of a street light as being mobile.
Well, I mean, just what we have now is insufficient, obviously, and what's keeping us from deploying sufficient improvements is lack of funding, and the cost of installing these crosswalks is cost prohibitively high. Just, I just know that other lighting technologies have come down drastically in price. Things have improved quite a bit on the market, and whether our staff is looking at trying to find ways, obviously you are, but I'm just trying to shed light on here, illuminating more crosswalks without the high cost of the installation that some of these other devices carry with them.
We do, just for the RRFBs, for an example, we do use solar very, very frequently on those installations. But with the solar, there is a trade-off between initial cost and maintenance. On a solar installation, we have to go back and maintain the solar panel and the batteries. Those batteries have a very definite shelf life. And so our preference would be a hardwired streetlight that will reduce future maintenance costs, particularly with LED. The relamping goes out well past 10 years, approaching 20 years, so we don't have to go back and deal with that light for 20 years. And on the solar, we'll be back far, far sooner than that to be doing battery replacements and other work on it.
Yeah, and I know time flies, so 5 years seems like a lot, but not really. I appreciate the efforts you made with the portal annual licensing agreement with the water department and the usage and reporting that to customers. I was really happy to see that included in the presentation. Real quick, just, I'm always curious on cost, something like that. What are we talking about?
And the annual license fee is in the neighborhood of $60,000,
Okay.
plus the actual staff time to implement it.
So nominal overall. My other question would be for the construction of the water plant. We have 2 plants right now. We have safe gap measures. If one goes down, we have, now when we go to construct the new one and we're down to 1 at that point, what is our contingency?
Well, we generally will try to keep the old plant in place. We don't have the design sequence done. I can speak to what we did at wastewater, where we completely rebuilt the west plant. There are treatment trains within each plant. The plant is not a single stream, so to speak. So where you might have 2 flocculation basins in a plant, you would take one down first and replace it, then do the other basin. So if you're doing it ideally, you are very briefly only totally down to 1 plant. I believe on the wastewater side, it was a matter of hours or days that you were down to 1 plant while you were doing some of the work. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's true. And when you look at, there's some level of redundancy built in because you have to do that anyways throughout the course of the year. You have maintenance that you have to do, so you can't always have everything going at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, we want Plant 2 to be in the best shape possible before we start taking parts of Plant 1 down, because to have a partial failure in Plant 2 and why Plant 1 down would be tight.
And at that point, we're got a situation where we're trucking in water or something at that point?
I'd only see these as reduced capacity, not trucking in water. We'd be making water, but we couldn't make all 38 million or 40 million gallons that were rated at that time.
Okay. Well, that pretty much includes what I was saying, but just real briefly, though, on the snow clearing, and I'm glad that it's being brought up with the protected bike lanes, but my interest and my curiosity is something that's far greater, and that's on all the bike lanes throughout our city that we use, and I just know, we got to put up those signs in the summer for pedestrian crossings, and then we take them down for winter, and I was thinking maybe this new equipment was going to be able to do the winter maintenance while those signs were still in the roads, but that's, from what I take it, not purpose of
That's
this.
not the purpose, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess these are a little out of order, but I'll follow up on the bike lane snow removal. So it's approximately $100,000 for that piece of equipment. And then are you just going to bounce somebody over like a temporary operator? You're not hiring a new operator for that, are you?
We don't have an operator in the budget for it.
Yeah, I didn't see that, so.
We have, the beauty of the Public Works is we can flex staff. We have very broad job categories, job descriptions, so we can flex people over when there's a need to do high priority work.
Yeah, I think I spoke with some people a couple summers ago, and I mean, this is maybe not pertinent to this, but we have a graffiti removal truck that splits time. Is that correct? Like they're out doing graffiti removal in the summer, and then in the winter they're doing some other service for the city?
It's, staff is flexed according to the season and
So
the
it'd be
needs,
that kind of
yes,
thing?
yes.
All right. So, okay. So jumping around a little, unfortunately, because the way the slides are, but I just wondered if you could help me define a couple things on here. On slide 9, under the General Fund Active Transportation, you talk about open streets. What does that mean?
I'm going to let Raymond Hess come up and talk about it.
Okay, yeah, he can
It's-
answer my 2 questions on that slide.
Yeah, it is a relatively new concept for us that we're proposing to implement.
Okay.
Very good. Councilmember Raymond Hess. So open streets, another term that it goes by is a cyclovia. So the idea is that you open up the streets to bicycle pedestrian, almost like in a linear park, or if you do a circuit or a circle. That really, and then you activate that space as well. So the idea is to get the community kind of out and celebrating in the streets about other ways to utilize that street and kind of think about some non-motorized and active forms of transportation.
So you've got some plan to try this out a couple times during the summer, that sort of thing?
We're currently having internal discussions about what that would look like. So we're convening the different departments that would be involved, trying to see, what resources would be needed. And so, I can't speak to how many. I think that's part of the process right now is, A, to see if there are any sponsors in the public that would be interested in assisting with this effort, seeing what it would take internally to pull such a thing off. We're looking at other communities that have done this. You don't have to look far. Detroit has an open streets program. Grand Rapids has an open streets program. And so it's just an opportunity, again, to kind of re-envision how a street can function and serve the needs of, and celebrate the use by pedestrians and bicyclists and special events along the way.
Have we ever looked at doing any scrambles? Like on, say, Liberty and Division, that kind of crossings?
Like a pedestrian scramble?
Yeah.
I believe my traffic engineers have, my transportation engineers have. I can't give you an answer at any specific location, but it has been looked at before. Ultimately what we try to do is just balance, all the different, uses at an intersection. So looking at the vehicular movements, looking at the pedestrian movements, looking at the bicycle and transit uses as well. And so yeah, I think it's one of those things that we can continue to explore. And if you have specific intersections you'd like us to look at, we gladly look into that more closely.
I see all the time down on Huron and I'm on Huron Division and Liberty all the time. Mm-hmm. And, traffic backs up, they can't make a right because there's so much pedestrian flow this way. And I often think, I've seen them work well in Chicago, and I thought it'd be great if they could just freeze everybody and let everybody move, and then the cars can go, and then the people and the bikes, and
Right.
just, since you're talking about open streets.
Yeah.
So this Washington Bicycle Boulevard on the same slide, I know we've talked about the William Bicycle Boulevard, and that's what the snow removal equipment's for. So tell me about Washington.
Okay, so just to differentiate, William Street is a cycle track. So, this is a dedicated bicycle facility that's separated from traffic. It's a buffered bike lane or a separated bike lane. Whereas a bicycle boulevard is a little different concept. We actually don't have one in town. This is called for in the non-motorized plan. And it's something that I'll get requests from the public on from time to time about what the status of that project is. And ultimately what it is, if you look at other communities throughout the country, I know Berkeley was one of the first to kind of pioneer bicycle boulevards. The idea is you keep transportation open, you don't close any part of the street, but you do promote bicycle and pedestrian traffic along the corridor. And then there may be certain things that calm traffic or divert vehicular traffic off of Washington. And so, again, we haven't really started the design concepts. I think this is just the idea of maybe some exploratory work to see what could be supported and then phase that into maybe an engineering and outreach effort. So bicycle boulevard, some of the treatments that it may include, but again, you really pick from a menu of different treatments. It could be signage, it could be traffic calming measures, it could be things such as traffic diverters. The idea is that bicycles and emergency vehicles can get through, but cars are forced to turn as opposed to going straight down the corridor. So
this is like from 7th to North University?
Well, yeah, so the reason why Washington is identified in the non-motorized plan is because it's a really long east-west corridor paralleling Huron that really gets you from, the Old West Side neighborhood all the way into campus. And so, I think we would look specifically at the lengths of that. You do have some pretty heavy uses with the YMCA and some other uses along that corridor, so all that would have to be taken into consideration with, what ultimately advances.
So this one-time impact is to study these types of things that are on the list here.
Right, yeah, I think the initial idea is just to start kind of the ideation of it, just to, again, we've one of the ideas we've talked about is, is there a partner at University of Michigan that we can work with to, explore some concepts? And, the amount that we have set aside, at least preliminarily in the budget, is a fairly nominal fee. And the idea is to, again, kind of vet some ideas so we can see what can be supported before we move into, design and preliminary engineering.
Thank you. Is there this is for the sidewalk millage that does repair that Councilwoman Lum spoke to earlier? Yeah, is that, are we able to keep up with our dream schedule of repairing these sidewalks? Or have we set our repair to match the millage rate, the millage revenue, or, I'm just curious if we're able to keep up.
We are on a 5-year program to go through the city, doing approximately 1/5 each year, and we are on schedule. We are into the second cycle going through the city.
Is there some point in that process where we're going to say, they're looking pretty good, and we don't need the same intensity of action?
That is our expectation as we go forward, as we deal with the issues. We are expecting, though we haven't had the proof yet, because we haven't been through the second cycle, that the level of investment can be reduced.
Okay, thank you. So what do I have next here? This lead and copper rules, this unfunded mandate from the state to replace these potential service leads from the curb stop back. I mean, we consider that an unfunded mandate right now. That's how it's in the books. Is that correct?
Correct. It would, the way the state has mandated it is that the local utility would be bearing that expense. And there is some of the utilities that are challenging that in court.
I just wonder if that's something that our tomorrow's policy agenda committee we might want to discuss.
If you want to discuss it, I can offer, I don't know if Molly's able to attend. I don't know what time you meet. She has been very much involved with the state on that.
Okay. Maybe we can speak after the meeting, just briefly. So the last thing, this is sort of a general question. I should probably know this, but when we look at these pie charts here, and we have fund depreciation figures in there, maybe Mr. Crawford could explain to me what that means exactly. Why is it that we have fund depreciation values in these pie charts? Like, what does that mean?
Marty, I'm happy to let you answer this, but I'll take a shot.
I mean,
if you have
sorry
something to
if
say.
it's a naive budgeting
No, it's fine.
question.
So the funds you're seeing those in are the enterprise funds. The accounting for those funds is much like the private sector. So when you have a significant asset, they are, as their life expires, you book the depreciation charge, which is a non-cash expense, during that life, so that at the end of that life, you then have a depreciated asset, which you have something to do with, a decision to do with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So I let my accountant do that because they did it for my truck, right?
Yes, it would be.
But I'm not paying every year again. Like that depreciation, it's like I don't understand why it shows up as part of.
It's an expense you're incurring, but it is not a cash expense. It's a non-cash expense. And on the books that are treated like that, so there's called full accrual books, you measure all of your cash expenditures along with these other non-cash expenditures so that you know economically how you've progressed through the year.
Okay. I guess the value of my used city truck is so low that I never really considered to ask him why he was doing it the way he was, so appreciate it.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? What is the schedule on a depreciation on a water treatment plant? How many years is that?
50.
Same as sewer, about 50?
That's considered the life of the plant before it needs reworking.
Yes. And we've done slightly better than that in the past on the old plant.
And that's the same when we discuss with sidewalks, where we say we can set the amount that the length of payback for a sidewalk assessment is set to is that set to the depreciated time frame of a sidewalk, the life of a sidewalk?
Not really. On the sidewalks, you can repair them and keep them for a long period of time. They're also typically done in small enough increments that there is no real depreciation on that. Am I correct in saying that?
It's a general fund item.
Well, that's true. When I've talked about full accrual accounting and how we record them on the books, the general fund, which is, as we've described, is where new sidewalks are funded out of if the city has to pay for it. The general fund is not on that basis of accounting. It's more of a cash basis of accounting.
Thank you. Sorry for that detour. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Some council members already covered some of my questions. Just want to say, as representing the third ward, where we do have a lot of issues, more, I would say, than 7 to 8 times a year with trash, I'm happy to see that enforcement position and hope that it does get funded. I would suggest if we can somehow get a hold of the number 99 trash to report some of those issues, like our 99 holes, that might be helpful for that person. Okay, so I heard about the Washington Bicycle Boulevard. Can we get a little more in-depth update on where we are in terms of recycling and the MRF and the role that this solid waste manager would play in that transition?
I'm going to let Mr. Slotin, who is steeped in that, the solid waste and recycling efforts, come up and answer your questions.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Just to double check, because I was about to jot down 99 trash, because I love that idea. I'm not sure that I caught the full question, Councilmember Grant. So
Just update on where we are with recycling and the role of the new solid waste manager in that process going forward.
Okay, so recycling today, we're, as Craig even described it, as a transfer operation because of the state of our equipment specifically inside the building. And so we're continuing that operation. And really, recycling is probably part of the broader discussion, both with the solid waste management plan that we're looking at locally in terms of the programs, looking at the data of what we're doing with how well we're doing with our recycling, how can we improve it. For example, one thing I definitely expect is more focus at commercial recycling, where we've got a lot of grow space there. How can we get that material into that stream? And then also, it was on the slide earlier too, but the approach to regionalization potentially, which is actually something that will be coming to the council soon, that potential to work regionally. As soon as next council meeting, most likely.
Okay.
So I have a feeling I'll be back next week.
Okay, excellent. Oh, and the role of the solid waste manager?
So the role of the solid waste manager really would, I guess, not a direct comparison, but I would draw kind of a comparison to Raymond with that new role, where pulling the different solid waste through the various reorganizations got kind of separated between systems planning and customer service and public works field operations. So we are pulling those folks now currently under Public Works and Molly, but really it does have the need for someone to really focus over even those staff that are working at dealing with the customers, the contractors, and the operations crews. So it's got somebody directly at it instead of just a person that's also looking at streets or utilities or something else as well.
Okay, so they might help with, say, pushes towards regionalization or expansion of commercial.
Yep.
Like you managed.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
All who've wished it have had their first bite. If there's any quick follow-ups, let's have quick follow-ups perhaps, and then I know we're all sitting down, perhaps can get out of here a little early. But I see a quick follow-up from Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just quick, Mr. Slotin. So you just said that, thanks, sorry, you just sat down. I'll be quick. The regional solid waste plan is coming to council, you said next council meeting. If I may, I mean, something like that, I know is going to be very, I would assume, detailed and complex, and my assumptions are correct, my description is correct.
Well,
are you bringing something to us to approve?
It's not the regional plan, but, and letting the cat out of the bag, I guess, because things there. But there's been efforts looking at a regional authority, basically communities coming together to form a group that would approach recycling
Okay.
and waste reduction from a regional perspective instead of individual jurisdictions. And so that's the item that will be coming to
My take is it
council.
sounds like a big deal. And given that, I would just respectfully suggest that we have a working session on this, because this is something that's going to take a lot of soak time, I think.
What we are bringing forward is the, I don't want to say the rules, the articles of incorporation for the regional waste management for the recycling. It does not establish any programs. It does not mandate us to participate in any of the programs. What it does is it sets the framework for the parties to participate and look at going forward with regional programs. And at each program if a program were to be rolled out, if we were to do a regional MRF or do regional recycling, each individual party can opt in or opt out as we go forward.
Okay, does it establish an authority? Is that
It
correct?
establishes the authority,
Okay,
it
then-
establishes the framework and the board of the authority.
I'm just saying, I'm going to be requesting and need as much background information as can be provided us, and probably more soak time. So just putting that out there.
But understand.
My 2 cents on
We can join the
considering a working
authority with
session.
no commitment going forward to having.
I know, but I recognize you've been working on this, and, but we've not been in that room, okay? So this is
Yes,
all
that's understood.
this is brand spanking new for us, so therefore, I'm just my 2 cents suggestion, having this as a work session item before any recommendation comes to us, so we can educate ourselves thoroughly.
There is no open work sessions beforehand. We will present it to you. We will gladly meet with individuals that would like to discuss it in
I want to meet on the
detail.
front end before we approve anything. So, again, I know I'm a broken record, but it doesn't sound like there's any urgency in the timing here. But again, you've been working on this. No information has been provided us about this. So
Go ahead.
that's my 2 cents on that.
I would guess just one thing I would add that occurred to me is it was presented to the Environmental Commission at the
Right,
January
I'm not on the
meeting, and
Environmental
that-
Commission.
Yeah, but that is,
As a council member, I've seen nothing about this, okay? And you get my drift. And why I'm suggesting a work session on this. Because I think there's just a lot of nuanced information that we need to fully grasp before we give a green light to an authority. It's an entirely different approach, and I think invites a lot of questions, and we need to do our due diligence. So whether or not the Environmental Commission is fully, versed in this, that's not us. It's a couple of us, but not all of us. Okay, that's it for that. And then just one, because there are all these questions about just open streets, transportation outreach campaign, the Washington Bicycle Boulevard. Just a follow-up, not for tonight, but if you could let us know how much of the 1.5 million is allocated to each as a follow-up, that would be helpful. Not this minute. Thanks.
Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Lum for suggesting a work session on the countywide plan. I did attend the Environmental Commission meeting, and I did listen to and read the proposed articles of incorporation, and I will tell you that I have some very significant concerns, and I would really like to have a full discussion rather than just a 10-minute discussion at a council meeting prior to a vote. So I would hope that we would try to make that opportunity to have a policy discussion as to how we intend to go forward on any idea of joining a countywide plan. Thank you.
Further questions, discussion? Thank you.
I have one short one.
Please.
A very short one. Late last week, Mr. Lazarus said that he was looking into sidewalk snow removal for elderly and disabled. And I know that probably you might not even have heard of that yet, but I was assuming that that would come under like slide 5, under that 15 million for major and local street funds.
I can't speak to that till I know what they're providing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Crawford, do you want the final word before public comment?
Council, thank you for your questions tonight. I just want to remind you that we will be following up and sending you responses to those. We've tried to capture everything that you've left for us that we couldn't respond to tonight. If you could email those to Sarah Higgins, City Administrator Lazarus, myself, and Lancaster, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Malawi, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.